Most property entrepreneurs think growth means buying more property, but often, the bigger opportunity is learning how to make each property produce more. That is the power of HMO conversions. In this masterclass, I'm going to show you what an HMO is, why it can outperform a standard buy-to-let where most investors get it wrong, and how PCMA helps you move from theory to compliant, profitable execution. When you understand HMO conversions properly, you stop looking at a house as just a house. You start looking at it as an asset that can be redesigned, repositioned, and optimized for stronger income. This is the principle of unit multiplication. You take one property and create multiple rental units within the same asset. Done correctly, this can increase cash flow, improve yield, and create a more valuable property. A standard buy-to-let might produce a 5 to 7% gross yield, but a well-planned HMO can often produce considerably higher returns because the income is spread across multiple lettable rooms rather than one household. However, there is one important warning. HMO success is not about squeezing in as many rooms as possible. That is where many investors get caught out. The real skill is knowing which property is suitable, what configuration works, what planning rules apply, what licensing requirements must be met, and whether the numbers still work after conversion costs, compliance, management, and ongoing maintenance. That is where PCMA Elite comes in. PCMA helps active property entrepreneurs bridge the gap between seeing an HMO opportunity and executing it properly, with education, planning, architecture, development support, and the infrastructure needed to turn HMO potential into a compliant, high-performing asset. Let's start with the basics. HMO stands for House in Multiple Occupation. In simple terms, it is a property rented by multiple people who are not from the same household, but who share facilities such as a kitchen, bathroom, hallway, or communal space. For example, instead of renting a 4-bedroom house to one family, you may convert that property into a professional HMO, where 5 or 6 individual tenants each rent their own room. Each room becomes its own income stream. That is why HMOs are attractive to property entrepreneurs. The reason HMOs work so well is because they change the economics of the property. With a standard buy-to-let, your income is usually limited by what one household is willing to pay for the whole property. But with an HMO, your income is based on what multiple individuals are willing to pay for individual rooms. That can create a much stronger income profile. For example, let's say a standard house rents for £1,300 per month as a family let. If that same property can be converted into a 5-bedroom HMO and each room rents for £600 per month, the total monthly rent becomes £3,000. That is more than double the rental income from the same property. But this is where you need to be disciplined. Because HMOs also come with higher costs. You have conversion costs, furniture, licensing, management, maintenance, utilities, fire safety, possible planning costs, and sometimes a longer setup period before the property is fully operational. So, HMOs are not automatically better. They are better when the income uplift is strong enough to justify the extra cost, complexity, and management. Now let's talk about where HMO projects usually go wrong. The first mistake is checking planning too late. Some investors find a property, run the rent numbers, get excited by the potential income, and only then ask whether the conversion is actually allowed. That is dangerous. In some areas, you may be able to convert a standard house into a small HMO under permitted development. But in many locations, especially areas with Article 4 directions, you may need full planning permission. The second mistake is misunderstanding licensing. HMO licensing varies by local authority. Depending on the number of occupants and the area, you may need mandatory licensing, additional licensing, or selective licensing. What works in one council area may not work in another. You need property-specific and location-specific guidance. The third mistake is forcing the layout. A room may look acceptable on a floor plan, but if it does not meet the required size, has poor natural light, lacks proper circulation, or compromises communal space, it can damage the project. The fourth mistake is underestimating fire safety and compliance. Fire doors, interlinked alarm systems, emergency lighting, protected escape routes, and building regulation requirements can materially affect the cost and design. If these are not considered at the start, they often become expensive problems later. The fifth mistake is modeling the deal like a normal buy-to-let. HMOs are more operationally intensive. You may have higher management costs, more maintenance, bills included in rent, more tenant turnover, and more compliance obligations. So the gross rent may look impressive, but the real question is what is left after all costs are included. That is why HMO success requires more than enthusiasm. This is where many active property entrepreneurs get stuck. You are dealing with planners, architects, licensing officers, building control, fire safety requirements, contractors, lenders, managing agents, tenants, and local authority policies. That is a very different game from simply understanding the concept. This is the knowledge-action gap. You know the strategy. That is why PCMA Elite exists. PCMA Elite is designed to help active property entrepreneurs move from opportunity to execution, not just by teaching the theory, but by helping you apply the strategy to real projects. There are two sides to the PCMA model. The first is the academy. This is where you learn the commercial and strategic side of HMO development. You learn how to assess an opportunity, how to think about yield, how to understand risk, how to compare an HMO conversion against a standard buy-to-let, and how to ask better questions before you commit capital. Not just, can this become an HMO? But, what is the highest and best use of this property? What is the correct planning route? What costs need to be included? What could reduce the return? The second side is the execution team. This is where PCMA becomes different from ordinary education. Because once you understand the strategy, you also need the right people to help apply it. That means planning input, architectural thinking, development guidance, project-level support. So, when you are reviewing a potential HMO conversion, you are not looking at it alone. Let's look at a simple example. An active property entrepreneur finds a tired 4-bedroom house in a strong rental area. As a standard buy-to-let, it might rent for £1,300 per month, but as a 5-bedroom HMO, with each room renting for around £600, the same property could potentially generate £3,000 per month. That is a significant uplift. But before moving forward, the question is not just, can this make more rent? The real question is, can it get through planning? Can the layout support 5 compliant rooms? Does it meet licensing and fire safety requirements? This is where PCMA helps turn a good-looking opportunity into a properly assessed project. Instead of guessing, you look at the planning route, layout, compliance, rental demand, cost, and end value. That is the PCMA approach. So if you are an active property entrepreneur looking at HMOs as a way to increase cash flow, improve yield, and scale beyond standard buy-to-let, the real question is, do I have the right strategy, planning route, design support, and execution team to make this project work? That is what PCMA Elite is designed for. If you are ready to build an institutional-grade property business, apply for PCMA Elite today.